On this Tuesday night, unruly rallies targeting Justin Trudeau. The demonstrations degenerate on the election trail.
It is absolutely unacceptable.
Are you going to report this? Who's behind this, and how are they tracking campaign stops? Alberta's ICUs pushed to the brink again. The solutions to free up beds and find more nurses. The lack of support for Canada's terror victims.
Just piecemeal that you find on your own.
Global News investigates what's needed to fill the gaps. And a world first. Bitcoin, now one country's legal tender.
We think it'll be the first of many countries that go in this direction.
Is it right on the money?
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin with breaking news in southwestern Ontario where a tornado may have touched down. Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell is at the scene in Kingsbridge. Anthony, what's the damage like?
Well, we are seeing extensive damage. This was a line of storms that affected such a large area of southwestern Ontario, but here in particular, we are north of Goderich in an area called Kingsbridge, and you can just see damage scattered about. This is from a silo and an entire barn that has come down, and there's debris, trees down all across the street. We're seeing some of these roofs and sheets of metal that have gone hundreds of meters in the other direction in adjacent fields. Now there is a widespread damage path from this suspected tornadoes. There are also pictures coming in from social media, so we do think it was in fact the tornado that moved from here all the way into a town called Lucknow, where there's also damage. There's also damage being reported in Port Elgin, Kincardine, where we rode out the storm as well. So this is a dangerous situation. Thankfully, where we are at this farm, there are no injuries. There is some damage, and there's also cattle that have been all scattered about in the fields. That's being rounded up right now, and that thankfully is the worst of it. But this is another suspected tornado in an area that just yesterday morning had a confirmed EF0 tornado roll through just down the street in Port Albert. That's it from here on a very rainy and still stormy evening in southern Ontario. Robin?
Anthony Farnell in Kingsbridge, Ontario. Thanks, Anthony. Now to the federal campaign where things have taken a violent turn. Protests targeting Liberal Leader Justin Trudeau have become so aggressive that police are now investigating. Protesters have been following the Trudeau campaign for weeks. He calls them anti-vaxxer mobs. At one event in Bolton, Ontario, the situation was so volatile, the Liberals cancelled it. Last night in London, Ontario, it got even worse. Trudeau was leaving a campaign stop at a brewery when gravel was thrown at him. Police in London have confirmed they've opened an investigation. As for Trudeau, he has no plans to stop campaigning in person.
A few misguided individuals who don't believe in science, who just want to watch things burn, are not going to make us flinch from doing the right thing. We will not stop talking about how we move forward.
Abigail Bimman has been traveling with the Liberals and was there last night when the gravel was thrown. Abigail, walk us through what happened.
Robin, the protesters have always been a group of screaming, incredibly profane people, furious with Justin Trudeau, usually numbering in the dozens. But the temperature raised to a dangerous level Monday when one or more people started to throw gravel or small stones at Trudeau as he was leaving a London, Ontario brewery photo op, hitting several other people, including journalists in the process. No one was hurt. These protesters also swarmed the bus before it tried to leave. I watched one man spit on it, and a police officer take away a man's hockey stick flag after he kneeled in front of the bus. Monday night, Trudeau's team would not confirm whether he was hit. When he boarded the campaign plane, reporters asked him about it.
It might have or it did.
Does that matter?
I think it matters, yeah.
You got hit by gravel. I was right next to you taking your photo. Yeah, there was a little bit of gravel.
It wasn't until Tuesday morning he confirmed that, yes, he had been hit.
Abigail, how are protesters able to get so close to Trudeau?
Well, that's a question that was put directly to him today. This is a man who thrives on public interactions, and he said the RCMP does have the final word on safety, whether an event proceeds or not. But he said being able to have politicians who feel safe connecting with people is an important part of the Canadian system compared to a country like the U.S.
We see little pockets of people lashing out in ways that remind us of horrific events like the storming of the Capitol. Canadians need to know that their leaders, that their country is standing firm to not let that happen.
What can you tell us about who these protesters are and how are they finding the events?
Robin, I've been watching them up close for a while, and what started as a real mishmash of different groups with different concerns, anti-vaxxers, anti-lockdown, anti-vaccine passports, has now changed to include a large number of People's Party of Canada supporters, the fringe political followers of Maxime Bernier, the only federal party leader flat out opposed to vaccine passports. His supporters see Trudeau events as an opportunity to mobilize. How are they finding those locations? Well, the Liberals have stopped broadcasting campaign tour specifics, but there's a network of social media pages tracking leader whereabouts and relying on people in local communities to find out, with some protesters now following between communities.
It's not simply that there's conspiracies around COVID, but they've kind of coalesced around multiple issues, including lockdown, including vaccine mandates. And we've seen, much like with previous movements like the Yellow Vest activism, for example, some far-right groups latching onto these movements as they're growing.
Ironically, whatever popularity the PPC attracts is a political gift for the Liberals or even NDP, with any votes that split the right further. Again, Trudeau said Tuesday he won't stop how he campaigns in the face of what he called angry mobs and angry anti-vaxxers. Robin?
Abigail Bimman in Ottawa. Thanks, Abigail. Both the Conservative and NDP leaders are condemning the protests.
I disagree with Mr. Trudeau all the time, but it is absolutely wrong to be throwing stones. I mean, I can't imagine that I'm saying this in 2021. Don't throw stones at people because you disagree with them. That is basic. That should not be happening.
It's completely unacceptable to see harassment of political figures, of media. We live in a great democracy, and let's act like we do. I don't agree with Mr. Trudeau's approach on many things, but I respect his ability to be able to communicate with Canadians free of harassment, intimidation, and violence, and for our media to report on that.
The Green Party, meanwhile, has released its platform with an obvious focus on protecting the environment. In a 101-page document, the Greens say if elected, they'd focus on getting to net zero emissions as fast as possible, with the aim of getting to net negative by 2050. All new pipeline and oil exploration projects would be cancelled. Existing oil and gas operations would be phased out. And every high-paying fossil fuel sector job will be replaced with a high-paying green sector job. To the pandemic, Alberta hospitals are under pressure to deal with a rapidly escalating fourth wave. The province is leading the country in daily new infections and active cases. More than 1,300 new infections were reported today. There are more than 15,000 active cases and 137 people in intensive care. Unvaccinated patients are driving the surge and filling up ICUs. As Heather Yourex-West explains, the worst may be still to come.
Inside Calgary's Peter Lougheed Centre, the intensive care unit is nearly completely full.
I think the next few weeks are critical. I would say I'm very concerned.
Almost every COVID-19 patient admitted to this ICU is unvaccinated. Still, the sick keep coming.
So if those cases continue to go up and we don't see a crest in that, then we're going to see more and more patients needing critical care support. So yeah, it's very concerning.
After weeks of silence, Alberta's government reintroduced a province-wide mask mandate Friday, along with a 10 o'clock curfew for liquor sales, but stopped short of implementing a vaccine passport system. Instead, the unvaccinated are now being offered $100 to get the vaccine. Alberta's former Chief Medical Officer of Health worries the measures don't go far enough.
There's a doubt that the incentive program is going to convince many of the people who've been irresponsible up to this point to change their mind. And I think that instituting masking indoors by itself is unlikely to be enough to bring the Delta variant under control.
Alberta Health Services has had to cancel many non-urgent surgeries across the province. Nurses are in such short supply, the province has also had to turn to out-of-province staffing agencies to help.
We need to have some basic protective measures put in place. We need to make sure that the spread of COVID-19 stops rapidly before we overwhelm our already near the brink healthcare system.
1 week into September, it's clear that Alberta's open summer is becoming a very difficult fall. Heather, Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Hospitalizations in Quebec are rising, tripling in just a month. Now, health and social service workers in both the public and private sectors are being told they have until October 15th to get fully vaccinated or be suspended without pay. Newfoundland and Labrador will implement a vaccine passport in the coming weeks. Premier Andrew Furey says it will follow the Quebec model. Quebec requires those aged 13 and over to show proof of vaccination to access non-essential services. Yukon is also launching its vaccine credential system. It will be online, and residents will get to choose between a digital copy or a paper copy to prove their vaccination status. And BC residents can now download their vaccine cards. The system comes into effect September 13th, requiring proof of at least one dose to enter venues like restaurants and ticketed sporting events. As of October 24th, people aged 12 and up will need to be fully vaccinated to access non-essential services. Fully vaccinated international travelers are now able to come to Canada for non-essential reasons, provided they meet all the requirements. Jamie Mauracher reports on the new rules.
Returning home from Islamabad, fully vaccinated Mississauga resident Daniel Kalani is relieved he can head straight home.
You can safely travel without even being quarantined, right?
Instead, border agents will look for a negative COVID-19 test result and scan the ArriveCan app for proof of vaccination with a Health Canada approved shot.
If your phone dies or you don't have access to your phone, immediate access to your phone, make sure you have those paper copies with you.
Or you risk having to isolate for 2 weeks, a precaution one infectious disease physician says we shouldn't be so quick to ditch, even for those with the double dose.
But we can't ignore the science, which is that if you are fully vaccinated, you can still become infected with the Delta variant.
The Delta variant has COVID cases climbing worldwide. Vin suggests a modified quarantine based on vaccination status. But according to the Canada Border Services Agency, the positivity rate for randomly selected fully vaccinated travelers between August 9th and 26th was extremely low, just 0.19%. And Ottawa is keeping travel suspensions in place for high transmission countries, including India and Morocco.
A traveler with a negative test when they enter Canada or 72 hours before they enter Canada is low risk for COVID-19. And then add to the fact that they're fully vaccinated and you're really starting to get into low risks despite how much transmission is happening locally.
For the Usman family, the ease restrictions allowed them to return home after months abroad.
Actually, we had to cancel our trip once because of the hotel quarantine.
The first trip of many, they say, vaccinated and again ready to explore the world. Jamie Mauracher, Global News, Toronto.
The new guard is the same one. Coming up, the Taliban unveils its all-male government with faces very familiar to the country. After seizing power in Afghanistan, the Taliban has now announced key members of its interim government. As Crystal Gumansing reports, this new cabinet is made up of the Taliban's old guard.
Protests in Kabul broken up by gunshots. The violence and uncertainty continues even as a new chapter begins with a new government. The head of the government under Taliban rule will be Mullah Mohammad Hassan Akhund. Mullah Akhund, who is already on a UN sanction list, has held power before as the country's deputy prime minister under the Taliban from 1996 to 2001. Announcing the interim government, the Taliban spokesperson says it wants to start new, yet it is relying on pillars of its insurgent past. The new leadership is closely tied to the Taliban's late founder, Mullah Omar. His son will serve as the country's new defense minister. And a man on the FBI's most wanted list is the interior minister. That's Sirajuddin Haqqani, whose father founded the Haqqani Network, a terrorist group that has since been folded into the Taliban. The government includes no women and will be overseen by the Taliban's supreme leader. Saeed Khan is an American senior lecturer in Near East Asian Studies.
While the Taliban acted very quickly in being able to take over Afghanistan, in many ways they perhaps were a little bit too far over leaning on their skis, so to speak. All of the tough role of governance is now at the hands of a generation past.
After the Taliban seized control in August, Western nations have been waiting to see how the new regime would be structured and how it would engage the world. It's unclear if this group will work with international leaders or if it will be given access to billions of dollars in aid. Threats of murder, violence, and intimidation remain, as do concerns about the way women and girls will be treated or if they'll have access to education. With part of the new interim government now in place, there are clues as to what life will be like with the Taliban back in control. Crystal Gamanson, Global News, London.
Still ahead, how Canada lags behind in supporting victims of terrorism. 24 Canadians were killed in the terror attacks of September 11th. Global News compiled a database that shows 80 Canadians have died in terror attacks since. Another 86 were injured. But Ottawa doesn't track the number of terrorism victims in this country. And as Jeff Semple reports, there are growing calls for more support for survivors and families of victims.
That's a picture of a jacaranda tree, which was Anne-Marie's favorite tree.
This picture is made up of thousands of photographs, memories of Michelle and Madeline's daughter, Anne-Marie.
She just had this warmth around her, a big smile all the time.
In 2013, Anne-Marie was living with her husband in Nairobi, working for Canada's Border Services Agency. The young couple was having lunch on a patio when 4 masked gunmen with an Al-Qaeda-linked extremist group attacked the shopping mall. Surveillance video, broadcast on local news, shows the Canadian couple at the top of the screen, crawling into the restaurant as bullets fly. 76 people were killed, including Anne-Marie.
I was just in shock and stayed in shock for almost a month.
Both Michelle and his wife Madeline spent their careers as foreign diplomats, helping Canadians abroad. Madeline was posted to Paris in 1996 when terrorists attacked a train station, killing 4, including a Canadian. She says the French government went to great lengths to support the victims, even granting a lifetime pension to another Canadian who survived. But their own experience has been much different.
It's just piecemeal that you find on your own.
Following Anne-Marie's death, they struggled with everything from obtaining a death certificate from Kenyan officials to dealing with the media, to finding appropriate psychological supports for themselves and Anne-Marie's husband, Robert, who still suffers from PTSD.
Dealing with counterterrorism and national security is not always just about chasing the bad guys, but it's also standing up for those victims of terrorism and supporting their rights.
Sushil Gupta was 12 when his mother was killed in the Air India bombing. He now works for the RCMP, supporting victims of crime, and believes Canada needs a dedicated office to meet the unique needs of terrorism victims.
You have organizations or government departments that have their own individual mandates. You need someone kind of quarterbacking it, linking them all together.
Anne-Marie's parents agree. They now volunteer to help others who've lost children. And every September 21st, on the anniversary of Anne-Marie's death, her mother forces herself to watch the footage, the last moments of her daughter's life.
I want to make sure, I need to have this feeling to be there with her.
Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
Up next, El Salvador goes all in on Bitcoin. El Salvador is the first country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. The government hopes it will help people out of poverty. 70% of its citizens don't have bank accounts, and Bitcoin is stored in digital wallets. Redmond Shannon reports on the tiny nation's big gamble.
El Salvador is one of the poorest countries in Latin America. Its struggling economy switched to the US greenback 20 years ago, and now it's making an unprecedented change.
Aprendamos a usar Chivo Wallet,
making Bitcoin legal tender alongside the American dollar. The trendy populist president Nayib Bukele says using crypto wallets will help Salvadorians bypass millions in remittance fees. Money sent from abroad funds a fifth of the economy. But critics say risk is baked into Bitcoin's DNA and that big ATM fees could negate any savings made.
no le entiendo.
This woman says she just doesn't understand it. Most Salvadorians don't even have access to the internet. As an incentive, the government is giving $30 worth of Bitcoin to anyone who downloads the digital wallet app. But on Tuesday, launch day, its site crashed. The president's Twitter account doubled as an IT help desk as he asked for patience. When Bitcoin's price dropped sharply, Bukele tweeted that he was buying the dip. In other words, investing more at a lower price.
It's actually madness, because what will happen immediately is that the international financial regulatory institutions will come down hard and red flag this, and there'll be sanctions.
Volatility combined with Bitcoin's lack of traceability could make it impossible for El Salvador to borrow.
You can't eliminate risk. Somebody has to take the risk of that volatility. Now, who will it be? It will be the taxpayers.
An impoverished country now banking its future on a currency few here can even access, let alone understand. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Robin Gill. We leave you tonight on a high note from the U.S. Open. Leylah Fernandez has done it again. The 19-year-old Canadian is off to her first Grand Slam semi-final after a major upset against Alina Svitolina. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.